You know, when most people think of the story of Karbala, they think of tragedy. It's a story of incredible loss, thirst, and just unspeakable cruelty. But what if that's only half the story? Today, we're diving into the perspective of the scholar Martyr Motahhari, and he argued that if you only see this event through the lens of tragedy, you're missing its most powerful message entirely. He saw it as something more, a triumphant, sacred epic, a story of heroism whose real purpose, he believed, has often been overlooked.
And right from the very beginning, the purpose of this movement was made crystal clear. I mean, this quote, it isn't some vague statement, it's a mission statement. It's a clear, powerful declaration of intent. Imam Hussain ﷺ is framing his stand not as some rebellion for power, but as a necessary, urgent act of reform, an attempt to get a community he saw as drifting way off course back to its core principles of justice and faith.
So to really unpack this incredible perspective, we're going to move through 5 key areas. We'll start with the reasons behind the movement, and then we'll explore this idea of the event having 2 faces. We'll define a crucial concept called the sacred epic, or Hamasa, talk about the serious danger of historical distortion, known as Tahreef, and finally, we'll see what kind of living legacy this event has when you see it in its true light.
All right. So let's set the stage. To really get a handle on the stand at Karbala, you have to understand the world it happened in. What was the why? What was it that compelled Imam Hussain ﷺ and his devoted companions to take such a monumental, and let's be honest, incredibly dangerous stand against the ruling power of their day?
Well, the ruler at the time, Yazid, represented a complete and frankly alarming break from the kind of leadership the community was built on. His rule wasn't just a political problem, it was seen as a fundamental threat to the moral and spiritual soul of society. I'm talking about open violations of Islamic values, corruption, and injustice becoming the new normal. And that created this deep crisis of faith and conscience that for some simply demanded a response.
And look, this wasn't some vague protest. The goals were specific, they were principled, and they were declared for everyone to hear. Imam Hussain ﷺ was explicit. First, Islah, or a deep, meaningful reform of the nation. Second, to uphold that core Islamic duty of calling people to what's good and forbidding what's evil. He was trying to bring the community back to the path of justice and compassion set by his grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and his father Ali ﷺ. And really, at the heart of it all was a principled refusal to legitimize a corrupt leader with an oath of allegiance, an act he believed would betray the very essence of Islam.
Okay, and this right here, this is the absolute core of Martyr Motahhari's entire analysis. He argues that the event of Ashura isn't just one single story. No, he says it has 2 distinct faces, 2 narratives that are happening at the exact same time. And the one you choose to focus on, well, that changes absolutely everything about the lesson you take away from it. So Motahhari breaks it down like this. On one hand, you've got the tragic face. This is the story from the bad guy's point of view. It's all about their criminality, their unbelievable cruelty, and the immense suffering they caused. And when you look at it this way, of course it's going to evoke deep sadness, grief, and pity. It's a truly dark chapter. But then, there's the other side, the epic face. And this is the story of the heroes, Imam Hussain ﷺ, his family, and his companions. This narrative is all about their incredible courage, their unwavering nobility, and their rock-solid faith against impossible odds. This view doesn't inspire pity. It inspires honor, strength, and a deep sense of human dignity. It's a luminous, shining chapter.
And this is where Motahhari really drives the point home. He insists that, yeah, the tragedy is real, we have to acknowledge it, but the radiance of the event, its heroism, its moral light, is so much greater than its darkness. If you only focus on the pain and the loss, you're only reading half the story, and you're missing the very reason this event has stayed so powerful for over 1,000 years.
So this heroic dimension, it's all built around a key concept that Motahhari uses, Hamasa. And trust me, understanding this one word is the key to unlocking the deeper, more empowering meaning of Ashura. It's what takes it from being just a historical tragedy to a timeless source of inspiration.
So what in the world is Hamasa? While it's not just any old story of bravery, it is a sacred epic. We're talking about a story defined by breathtaking heroism, by courage in the face of total annihilation, and an unshakable sense of dignity. But here's the most important part. It's all driven by a noble, divine purpose. This isn't about personal glory or gaining power. It's a showcase of humanity's absolute highest spiritual and moral potential, live and in action.
Now, this is a really important distinction he makes. Think about national epics, right? Like the Persian story of Rustam. That story belongs to a specific people, a specific culture. It's rooted in national pride. But a sacred epic, the Hamaasa-e-Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam, is seen as universal. It goes beyond nationality, beyond race, beyond time. Why? Because its heroes aren't fighting for land or for their tribe. They're fighting for universal truths, for justice against tyranny, for freedom of conscience, for faith itself. And in that sense, their story belongs to every single one of us.
But that raises a big question, doesn't it? If this event was such a powerful, sacred epic, why is it that so often we only hear about the tragedy and the suffering? Well, this brings us to the next critical problem Motahhari identifies, the very real, very grave danger of Tahreef, or the distortion of historical truth.
Tahreef is basically the act of changing something from its original, true form. And it can happen in a couple of ways. First, you can distort the literal facts, changing what happened, adding things that weren't there. But then there's a more subtle and maybe even more dangerous kind of distortion, changing the meaning, changing why it happened and what it really stood for. And that corrupts the entire message.
And this is the problem. Motahhari argues that over the centuries, the historical story of Karbala got hit with both kinds of tahreef. Fabrications, crazy exaggerations, and just straight-up falsehoods were slowly woven into the narrative. These additions started to cloud the event's core message, slowly burying that epic of strength and justice under a mountain of fables designed to make you feel pity, not inspiration.
And some of the examples he gives are just wild. There are claims that Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam single-handedly killed hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And when people said, hey, that's not physically possible, a new fable was invented that the day of Ashura was magically stretched to be 70 hours long. You have fabricated stories like the dramatic presence of Ali al-Akbar's mother Layla, which historical records just don't back up. These distortions, even if they were meant to glorify, actually do the exact opposite. They turn a profound historical reality into an unbelievable myth, and they take away from the true, humanly achievable heroism that was so incredible in the first place.
And this, right here, is the real damage of Tahreef. Motahhari puts it so powerfully. He says the real tragedy we should be weeping for are the lies that have been told about Karbala. Why? Because those distortions strip the event of its revolutionary power. They take what should be a school of courage, a timeless guide for standing up to injustice, and they shrink it down to a simple, passive story of victimhood that only asks for our tears, not our action.
So where does that leave us? This brings us to our final section. If we peel back all those layers of distortion and we look at the event as the sacred epic it was meant to be, what is its real, enduring legacy? Why does this story still resonate so deeply across centuries and cultures when we understand it correctly?
Well, the authentic story of Karbala was like a lightning bolt. First, it sent a massive shock to the conscience of a community that had kind of fallen asleep at the wheel. It restored a sense of spiritual identity and dignity that was fading away. By showing that kind of incredible courage and principle, it became this timeless, universal symbol of resistance against tyranny. And because of that, it has served as a moral compass, a source of inspiration for countless movements for justice and reform ever since.
So at the end of the day, the whole purpose of remembering Ashura gets transformed. It's no longer a passive act of just mourning a tragedy that happened a long time ago. It becomes an active, annual process of absorbing the very spirit that was on display that day. That spirit of immense courage, of unshakable faith, and a human dignity that absolutely could not be broken, even in the face of total annihilation.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. History is full of martyrs. But our understanding of their sacrifice and its power to shape our world today changes completely depending on what we focus on. So we're left with this question. How does our world, and maybe even our own ability to create change, transform when we remember a martyr not for the tragedy of how they died, but for the triumphant, epic ideals they were willing to die for?